Welcome back to County Connection. For this final segment of our March episode, we are talking property taxes, and here to enlighten us are the folks from the Summit County Assessor's Office. Your elected Summit County Assessor, Beverly Breakstone. Welcome, Beverly.
Thank you very much.
And Denise Stayskull, Deputy Assessor. Welcome, Denise.
Thank you.
So, first of all, why don't you ladies tell us about your role in the property tax process here in Summit County?
Well, the assessor is an elected position and is responsible for the determination of property tax, which is what supports our local taxing entities, such as the counties, the school, the fire departments, the towns, special districts, and so on. So that's why it's important, and there are some very defined statutory ways that we have to go about it. There's nothing flexible at the local level. It's all set forth by state law.
Okay.
So can you have some else?
And so how do you go about the assessment process?
Well, basically, statute requires the assessor to revalue property every 2 years. Back in the 70s, it used to be every 4 years, and so there was a real gap in what real time versus the assessor's records. So with the tightening of that every 2 years, we're now looking at the reappraisal. It always happens in the odd years, which 2017 is a reappraisal year, based on property transactions, income, and expense information from the 24-month period ending June 30th of 2016.
Okay.
So everything for property taxes in the rears. So that's probably some of the biggest rub in a declining market after the end of the data collection period, when people want to use sales that are after that date. But by statute, the assessor's office and all assessors in the state of Colorado cannot use that data. So basically, our staff right now is compiling all of the sales data, analyzing the sales data, looking at income information and cost information, and compiling what we feel is the best database in order to set values. For residential property, it's just the market approach to value. For vacant land and commercial and all other properties, it's cost, market, and income.
Okay.
And so that's kind of a restriction for residential, and that includes apartment buildings.
Okay. And so when your office does the valuation process, then there is also an appeal process if people disagree with that valuation. Is that right?
Sure. So first of all, what we'll send is all taxpayers will get a notice from us on May 1. That's statutory. It has to go out on that day. Then they have 30 days to appeal. So usually depending on whether or not June 1st falls on a weekend, but June 1st and a Monday following if it does fall on a weekend. So we want everyone to get their appeal in by June 1.
Okay.
Then we have a month to respond. And so then they'll get our answer to their appeal.
Okay.
There is another process in place. If they miss this period, it's called the abatement, but they can't file for that until after January 1 when they get their tax notice. But that's not an efficient or an effective way to appeal their value. It's best to do it during May and follow the statutory process.
Okay.
And then that means we'd have it correct on January 1 when they start receiving their tax bill.
Sure. Mm-hmm. So a lot less paperwork if you are in that May time period.
And it's not very timely, the abatement process. The other process is very rigid.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So definitely keep an eye, just make a mental note, keep an eye out for that notice of valuation the first week of May.
Correct.
And then initiate that appeal process if you so choose.
Right.
Exactly.
All right. So what trends are you seeing right now in terms of Summit County property valuations?
Denise has our chief appraiser's notes, so
Yes.
she's going to run with this.
Okay, take it away, Denise.
Vacant land in residential is seeing an excess of 15 to 20% in an increase between the last reappraisal and this one, and commercial is in an excess of 10 to 15. But in all classes of property, we are seeing increases greater than those numbers I just gave you.
Okay.
So we're not saying that everything's going to increase 20%. It's in excess of. So everybody's a little bit different depending on your location, quality of the property, and what type of property you have. So we have not seen this type of increase in many, many years, because when we had the big downturn,
Sure.
We weren't seeing this type of property value.
Okay.
And I think you see it just by reading the newspaper, picking up one of those brochures from the real estate agents.
Right.
Property values are very healthy, and staff is continuing to see those values rise as we see sales that have occurred after June 30th.
And we're seeing one of our appraisers who specializes in Breckenridge and the ski side, that area continues to have increases that are greater than what Denise is talking about, because the demand for properties that are near the ski area seems to be in its own class.
Okay. Yeah, we are seeing increases in population in the Front Range, and then the
Right.
improving health of the economy.
Sure.
So that demand for those kind of vacation type properties or ski area type properties is
Exactly.
really going through the roof.
Yes. Good way to put it.
So, given that property values are rising, you would expect to see property taxes rising as well by comparable amounts, but because of some complications in the Colorado Constitution, that isn't necessarily the case. So, can you explain what's going on with that?
Sure, I'll do part of that and Denise will do part of that. Actually, the taxing entities that receive the money have to do a budget. And there are very defined rules based on this TABOR, Taxpayer Bill of Rights, of how much they can get of this new value. So they will set their budgets, but only using this required amount. But then the residential properties will maybe not see, based on this new problem that we're seeing with the assessment ratio. So why don't you talk about that part?
Basically, as we've spoken before, we've got this Gallagher Amendment and we have TABOR. And the two of these are colliding right now. Gallagher sets the assessment ratio. TABOR is the restrictive piece of statute which Bev was talking about, how much you can increase your revenues. So Gallagher requires that the state during a reappraisal year calculate the contribution of residential versus all non-residential property in assessed values statewide. And based on a study that was done back in 1982, they felt that ratio should be 45-55, and that remains. So they established that commercial, all non-residential should be set at 29%, and that the residential rate should fluctuate so that 45-55 split it stays the same. In the last couple reappraisals, the actual rate should have gone up for residential. But with TABOR, it says if you raise the rate, that means you raise taxes. So you have to ask the general public if they will approve that. And that has never happened. So now with this big boom and bust in the metro areas where we've got so much residential coming online, the residential rate is going to drop to 6.56 from 7.96, which it has been for many, many reappraisal cycles. So even though residential may be going up 18%, you've got close to an 18% decrease in the rate. Residential properties may see a slight decrease in their total tax bill, but commercial is going to be hit hard. And I have an example for you.
Sure, yeah.
If you have a $700,000 property, residential or commercial, and that's going to change this year, it'll go for residential based on our preliminary numbers to $826,000. The commercial property will go to about $798,000. But with the change, with commercial staying at 29%, residential going to 6.56, the tax burden on that same valued property will be $3,000 for residential, but $14,000 for commercial.
Wow.
So you can see what Gallagher does to the tax burden for commercial properties in the state of Colorado.
So this is something that's really getting to a critical point. And our elected officials probably need to begin to look at some way to try and solve this inequity. Because, we've had commercial taxpayers come in, restaurant owners, that, this is a difficult thing to take increase in taxes like this.
Sure.
Whereas the residential continue to see benefits.
Right.
So it's a difficult time. This will create some hardship for commercial and vacant landowners.
Right. And then Denise, I think you mentioned that proportion between residential property tax and commercial property tax essentially is looked at statewide.
Statewide.
So it's not on a countywide basis.
No,
So then that results in a variety of effects depending on your mix of commercial and residential.
Pretty much the metro areas are driving the assessment ratio. It's not all us little guys in the outskirts.
That's very true. And one of the things that's an impact this year in particular is that oil and gas revenue, which normally would drive up the commercial base, has dramatically gone down because of the slowdown in the industry. So that's one of the factors, not only just all the residential building that's happening, but this unfortunate situation with oil and gas decreasing.
Okay, so this really is a conundrum in terms of all of these opposing forces and ripple effects that we have locked into the Colorado Constitution.
Right.
Well, Gallagher was working just fine until Tabor came on board 10 years later. Because the entities could adjust their levies accordingly to take care of these drops in the residential assessment ratio.
And Denise and I were talking today, it's really a conundrum because this 6.56 will stay where it is. And it can't go back up without a vote of the people.
Right.
And there's just no motivation of taxpayers to say, oh, I'm going to raise my taxes.
So given the mix that we have in Summit County of commercial versus residential properties, and so what will be the impact on the Summit County budget?
Well, basically, it's even though the total roll and actual value is anticipated to increase about 16%, the total effect to the roll is just over 1%. Because there's such a bulk of residential property. Instead of the 45-55, we are 38-62. So it's a huge difference.
Right.
So
Essentially, residential properties are over 85% of our total properties, including the residential is about 55% condominium. So we're just highly residential here, which is why we're impacted so much.
All right. Well, there you have it. Not much we can do about it unless we see a change in the Colorado Constitution, but residential property owners can expect their taxes to remain flat, more or less. And our commercial property owners will see quite significant increases.
And when it comes down to budget times with the entities, there's two calculations that they look at. And that's required by statute. It's the 5.5% limitation that's based on assessed value, and then there's the Tabor calculation based on actual value. So even though the total assessed value may seem flat, they still have a little bit of leeway in how they can increase their revenues. So that's another part of the puzzle that happens in a whole different arena than what we do.
Right.
And also there will be, and this is just something we don't have right now in its greatest detail, there is new construction, which doesn't fall with underneath all this, so it adds value.
Right.
So hopefully that will help out the situation as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so if folks at home have additional questions about this, it is fairly complicated and takes some sorting out, or if they have questions about their own property valuation or property taxes, where can they go to get answers?
So just call our office, 970-453-3480, and we are happy to talk to anyone anytime.
Or assessor@summitcountyco.gov.
All right.
And there's lots of information on the website.
Yes,
Okay, perfect.
very much.
All right. Well, Denise and Beverly, thanks so much for coming into
welcome.
the SCTV studio today.
You're welcome.
Great to have you. Thanks for breaking down this complicated issue for us.
You're very welcome.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
And thanks to those of you who've joined us from home for another episode of County Connection. We'll look forward to seeing you next month.